Ancient Egypt lasted 3,000 years, the longest civilization in human history. And at the center of all of it, gods who were worshipped by millions of people across dozens of centuries. But here is what nobody tells you about those gods. They were not wise. They were not just. They were not even particularly competent. The chief god lost his own children minutes after creating them. The goddess of magic could not heal her son from a scorpion sting. And the most powerful beings in existence spent 80 years arguing about something a child could have resolved in 5 minutes. So how did a civilization built around these gods survive for 3,000 years? And more importantly, what did these people actually believe that kept them going that long? Because the answer is stranger than anything the history books ever told you. And it starts before the world existed, before Egypt, before the Nile, before anything existed at all. There was water. Not an ocean with shores and waves and depth, just water. Infinite, dark, completely still. No air, no light, no time. No sound. And then something moved. From the depths of this primordial water, a god emerged. His name was Atum-Ra. Nobody created him. Nobody planned for him. He simply appeared, the way the first thing always appears in every creation story. Because something has to be first. He looked around. There was nothing. So he did what any reasonable god would do in that situation. He created 2 children from himself, a god named Shu, god of air, and a goddess named Tefnut, goddess of moisture. Then he lost them immediately, because he had forgotten to create light first. Total darkness. 2 newly created divine beings somewhere in infinite water. No way to find them, no way to call for them. Ra solved this problem with characteristic logic. He tore out his own eye and sent it to search for his children. The eye, now apparently capable of independent thought and movement, went searching through the darkness. Eventually, it found Shu and Tefnut and brought them back. Ra was so grateful that he wept. And from his tears, humans were created. Not deliberately, not as a grand design, not because Ra wanted companions or worshippers or someone to build him pyramids. Just accidentally, from crying. This is how the Egyptians explained the origin of humanity, their entire civilization, their pharaohs and temples, and 3,000 years of history. A side effect of a god crying because he temporarily misplaced his children. But Ra had a different problem now. His eye, the one he had sent searching, came back to find that Ra had grown a replacement eye while it was gone. The original eye was understandably upset about this. To calm it down, Ra took the original eye and placed it on his forehead, where it stayed, watching everything, seeing enemies before they arrived, firing what ancient texts describe in terms that sound remarkably like laser beams at anyone who threatened Ra. The Eye of Ra, one of the most powerful symbols in all of Egyptian mythology. Born because a god forgot to make light. From Shu and Tefnut came Geb, god of earth, and Nut, goddess of the sky. These 2 loved each other so completely that they could not be separated. They existed in a permanent embrace. Nut arched over Geb, the sky curved over the earth. Their father, Shu, found this excessive and separated them by force, lifting Nut up and holding her above Geb permanently. In doing so, he accidentally created the space between earth and sky, where everything else would eventually exist. Nut and Geb had children, and those children would change everything. But first, Ra cursed one of them before they were even born. Nobody is entirely sure why. Before we get to the curse, you need to understand what Egyptian gods actually were, because they were nothing like the gods you know from Greece. Greek gods were immortal, eternal, untouchable. You could humiliate them, trick them, chain them to rocks, but they kept going forever. Death simply was not an option. Egyptian gods could die, not easily, but a powerful enough enemy, the right spell at the right moment, and a god was gone, permanently. They could also get old. Ra himself, the supreme creator, the most powerful being in existence, the god who literally kept the sun moving, grew so ancient and frail that he drooled. His mind wandered. People stopped fearing him, stopped worshiping him. The creator of the universe, drooling. And unlike Greek gods, who could not walk past a mortal without immediately trying to sleep with them, start a war over them, or turn them into something, Egyptian gods largely ignored humans. You existed because Ra accidentally cried. After that, he moved on. People built cities, invented writing, developed agriculture, organized one of the greatest civilizations in history. The gods watched from a distance, and occasionally showed up when something threatened cosmic order. Think of them as the world's most powerful and least reliable emergency services. They had extraordinary abilities: transform into animals, control weather, resurrect the dead, travel between worlds. They also got captured by giants, lost their eyes with suspicious regularity, made bets they obviously could not win, got tricked by their own family members using plans that should not have worked on anyone over the age of 7. Genuinely unlimited power. Absolutely no common sense. This combination turns out to be extremely entertaining and occasionally catastrophic for everyone involved. Remember Nut, the sky goddess who was separated from her husband by her own father? Ra cursed her, for reasons that ancient texts describe as anger but never fully explain. Maybe she had done something to offend him. Maybe he simply did not want more gods competing for power. Maybe the supreme creator of existence was just having a bad day. The curse was simple and total. Nut could not give birth on any of the 360 days of the year, every day, forever. No children. Nut went to Thoth, god of wisdom, magic, and writing, the most reliably competent deity in the entire Egyptian pantheon, the one god who consistently solved problems instead of creating them. Thoth thought about it, then went to find the moon. The moon at that time was responsible for keeping time, moving steadily through the sky, marking days and months and years. Thoth proposed a game, something like chess or dice. The moon agreed. They played. Thoth won. The moon had bet time itself and lost. Specifically, it lost enough time, taken a few minutes from each day across an entire year, to create 5 entirely new days, days that existed outside the calendar, days that Ra's curse did not cover. 5 days in Nut could give birth freely. Ra was apparently unable or unwilling to extend his curse to days that had been given to him as a gift. Divine legal technicalities. They mattered enormously. On the first day, Osiris was born. On the third day, Seth. On the fourth and fifth days, 2 daughters, Isis and Nephthys. Osiris grew into everything a god-king should be: wise, patient, genuinely good in a way that most Egyptian gods were not. He taught humanity agriculture, showed them how to cultivate wheat and irrigate fields from the Nile, gave them writing and law and medicine, explained the difference between right and wrong. Under Osiris, humanity transformed from scattered tribes eating roots and occasionally each other during famines into something resembling civilization. Everyone loved Osiris, except Seth. Seth had hated his brother since childhood. The reasons were never entirely clear even to the Egyptians. He was simply the kind of being who looked at goodness and found it unbearable, who saw universal love and felt only the absence of his own name in it. He wanted the throne, and he had a plan. The plan was, by any reasonable standard, completely idiotic. Seth secretly obtained Osiris's exact measurements while the God King slept. Then he commissioned the most beautiful sarcophagus ever created, perfectly proportioned, decorated with gold and precious stones, an object of extraordinary craftsmanship. Then he invited Osiris to a feast. At the feast, Seth produced the sarcophagus and announced, as if this were a perfectly normal thing to do at a dinner party, that he would give it to whoever fit inside it perfectly. The gods at the feast began climbing in and trying it for size. The gods of ancient Egypt, beings of cosmic power, climbing into a coffin one by one to see if it fit. Eventually, Osiris tried it. It fit perfectly, because it had been made specifically for him. Seth slammed the lid. His servants sealed it with nails. Then they carried it to the Nile and threw it in. Osiris, supreme God King, teacher of civilization, beloved by all of existence, had just been murdered by climbing voluntarily into a box at a dinner party. The coffin drifted down the Nile and out into the sea. Eventually, it washed ashore near a city called Byblos, where a tree grew up around it. The local king cut down the tree and used it as a column in his palace. The most important object in Egyptian mythology was now structural support for someone's dining room. Seth declared himself king and told Isis, Osiris's wife and the most powerful sorceress in existence, to accept the new reality and leave. Isis went to find her husband. She was the goddess of magic, the greatest healer in Egypt, the most skilled user of divine power in the entire pantheon. It took her a surprisingly long time to find a coffin that had washed up on a well-known beach and been turned into an architectural feature of a major building. She eventually arrived at the palace in Byblos, disguised as an ordinary woman. The queen's servants found her sitting by the shore. They brought her to the palace. Nobody recognized the most famous goddess in Egypt. She became a nursemaid for the queen's son and discovered that the column in the dining room contained her husband's body. She retrieved the coffin, hid it in the marshes of the Nile Delta, and went to consult with her sister Nephthys about what to do next. Seth went hunting that night and found the coffin by accident. He opened it, looked at the body of his brother, and panicked. Not because of guilt, not because of regret, but because he knew that Isis was powerful enough to resurrect the dead, and he could not allow Osiris to return. So he cut the body into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. 14 pieces, hidden across the entire country, each one buried or thrown into the Nile or placed somewhere that Isis would never find them. Seth then apparently felt that this problem was solved and went back to being king. Isis and her sister Nephthys spent the next 12 days searching Egypt, piece by piece. They found 13. One piece, and Egyptian texts are very specific about which piece, had been eaten by a fish in the Nile and could not be recovered. Isis reassembled what remained, used her magic to restore Osiris temporarily to life. Long enough for one thing: Horus was conceived. Then Osiris died again, this time permanently. He descended to the underworld where he became its ruler, the judge of the dead, the weigher of souls, the god who decided what happened to every human being after death, the most important figure in all of Egyptian religion. Created entirely because Seth had a coffin made and invited people to climb into it. Isis was the most powerful goddess in Egypt, goddess of magic, goddess of healing, the greatest sorceress in existence, the being who could resurrect the dead, manipulate reality, and outsmart gods who had existed since before time began. She was also, in practice, genuinely terrible at her job. Let us start with her son. Horus was born in secret while Seth controlled Egypt. Isis hid him in the marshes of the Nile Delta, the most protected location she could find, and raised him alone. Surrounded him with every magical protection available to the most powerful sorceress in existence. Horus was stung by a scorpion anyway. On her watch, in her location, under her protection. Her son, a god, the future king of Egypt, the child she had been guarding with everything she had, was dying. And Isis, the goddess of healing, had absolutely no idea what to do. She ran through the marshes screaming for help, the most powerful magical healer in existence, running and screaming because her child had been stung by an insect. Ra had to stop the sun, not metaphorically, the actual sun, the mechanism that kept the world alive. Ra stopped it mid-journey across the sky and sent Thoth down to help. Thoth arrived, looked at the situation, and explained to the goddess of healing that her son had been stung by a scorpion. That was the diagnosis: scorpion sting, something any Egyptian farmer could have told her. Thoth cured Horus. Ra restarted the sun. The world continued. Isis stood there. The goddess of medicine had just been taught basic first aid by someone else while the sun sat still in the sky. This was not a one-time incident. There was also the fire situation. Isis was staying at a palace in Byblos, hiding from Seth while searching for Osiris's body. As a thank you to the queen who had sheltered her, she decided to make the queen's young son immortal. Reasonable enough. A nice gift. Her method was to place the child in magical fire every night. Fire that did not burn. Fire that slowly removed mortality and replaced it with divinity. This was actually working, until the queen walked in one night and saw her child standing in flames. The queen screamed. Isis was startled. The spell dropped. The magical protective fire became regular fire immediately. The child, who had been perfectly safe 1 second earlier, was now in genuine danger. Isis saved him, barely. But the immortality process was permanently interrupted. The child, who had been days away from becoming a god, was now just a regular human child, because his babysitter got startled. The goddess of magic and healing, interrupted mid-spell by a scream, could not restart the process. A child lost his shot at immortality because Isis could not work under pressure. And then there was Ra. Ra had grown genuinely, visibly, embarrassingly old. He drooled, he shuffled, his mind wandered. The supreme creator of the universe had become someone that people whispered about rather than feared. Isis looked at this situation and saw an opportunity. She collected Ra's drool from the ground, his actual drool, from the floor, mixed it with earth, created a magical snake, placed it in Ra's path. The snake bit him. Ra, who had created the universe from nothing, was completely helpless against a snake made from his own saliva. The venom spread. The pain was unlike anything he had experienced. He called for help. Isis appeared. She could cure him, she said. She had the magic. She had the knowledge. But she needed his secret name. Every Egyptian god had a public name and a secret true name. Knowing the secret name gave you complete power over that being. Ra had kept his secret for longer than the world had existed. Ra refused. The venom spread further. Ra refused again. The pain became unbearable. Ra told her his secret name. Isis cured him immediately. walked away with complete power over the supreme god of Egypt. As payment for treating a snake bite she had arranged herself, she poisoned the most powerful being in existence with his own drool, then charged him his deepest secret as the cure, and left him lying there, grateful and completely unaware of what had actually happened. This is Isis at her absolute best. Not healing, not magic, just a scheme so audacious that the victim thanked her afterwards. The greatest goddess in Egypt was not great because she was wise or powerful or compassionate. She was great because she was willing to do things that nobody else would even think of, including poisoning a god with his own saliva and calling it medicine. Horus grew up with one purpose: avenge his father, reclaim the throne, defeat Seth. Simple enough in theory. In practice, it took 80 years. Not 80 years of constant battle, not 80 years of epic struggle between cosmic forces of good and evil. 80 years of arguments, legal proceedings, boat races, eye removal, and one incident involving a lettuce that ancient Egyptian texts describe in complete seriousness. It started with a challenge. Horus went before the Council of Gods and stated his case. His father had been the rightful king. His father had been murdered. By divine law, the throne passed to the son. The case was, by any reasonable standard, completely obvious. The gods deliberated for 80 years. Part of the problem was Ra. Ra, the supreme god, the creator of existence, the being whose opinion theoretically settled all disputes, inexplicably supported Seth throughout the proceedings. Not because Seth had a stronger legal case, not because Ra believed Seth would be a better king, simply because Ra found Horus irritating. When other gods argued that obviously the throne should go to the legitimate heir, Ra sulked. When the evidence against Seth was presented, Ra pointed out that nobody had asked for his opinion. When the council seemed to be reaching the obvious conclusion, Ra dissolved the meeting. The gods of Egypt, beings of cosmic power responsible for maintaining the order of existence, spent 8 decades unable to reach a decision because their chairman kept changing the subject. Meanwhile, Seth and Horus fought. Not always in ways that made sense. In one confrontation, Seth challenged Horus to a contest. They would both transform into hippopotamuses and dive to the bottom of the Nile. Whoever stayed underwater longest would win the throne of Egypt, decided by a breath-holding competition between 2 gods in hippopotamus form. Isis, watching from the shore, decided to help her son by throwing a harpoon into the water. She missed Horus and hit Seth. Then she felt sorry for Seth and pulled it out. Then she threw it again and hit Seth again. Horus, watching this from underwater in hippopotamus form, became so angry at his mother for showing mercy to his father's murderer that he climbed out of the river, cut off her head, and carried it to the mountains. Isis's head was later restored by Thoth. This was apparently a normal Tuesday in divine Egypt. The physical confrontations between Horus and Seth followed a consistent pattern. Horus would gain an advantage. Seth would do something unexpected. Horus would lose an eye. Someone would reattach the eye. They would begin again. Horus lost his eye so many times that the Eye of Horus became one of the most powerful symbols in Egyptian mythology, representing healing, restoration, and protection. Because it had been removed and restored so many times that it had developed its own divine significance. Seth also tried a different approach. He invited Horus to his house for dinner. During the night, Seth attempted to assault Horus in a way that, if successful, would have humiliated Horus so completely that the gods would have stripped him of any claim to the throne. Horus was awake. He caught what Seth attempted and preserved the evidence in his hands. In the morning, he went to Isis and showed her. Isis, displaying the practical creativity that defined her, cut off Horus's hands and threw them in the Nile, grew him new hands, then took what Seth had left behind and spread it on Seth's favorite food. Seth ate it. Isis then went before the council of gods and announced what had happened. The gods, who had been arguing for decades, sat in silence for a long moment. Seth was declared ritually defeated, not through battle, not through legal argument, through a lettuce. But Seth still refused to accept the verdict. He challenged Horus to one final contest. They would build stone boats and race them. Seth went to the mountains and carved an enormous vessel from solid rock. Heavy, impractical, visually impressive. Horus built a wooden boat, then covered it entirely in white gypsum so it looked like stone. The race began. Seth's boat sank immediately. Horus's boat floated. Seth, having just watched his stone boat sink while his opponent's apparently identical stone boat sailed past, transformed into a hippopotamus and attacked Horus's vessel directly. Horus raised his harpoon. Seth appealed to Ra. He announced loudly that his nephew was about to murder him, and surely Ra would not allow such a thing. Ra, who had spent 80 years supporting Seth through every piece of evidence, every legal argument, and every divine judgment, told Horus to put the harpoon down. Horus put the harpoon down. But the gods had finally had enough. Osiris himself sent a message from the underworld, a pointed letter asking why his son had not yet been given his rightful throne. Asking why the beings responsible for justice in the universe had spent 80 years failing to reach an obvious conclusion, mentioning that the underworld contained every human being who had ever died, and that he had significant influence over what happened to all of them. The gods read the letter and immediately declared Horus the rightful king of Egypt. Seth was brought before the council in chains, and then, in a decision that surprised everyone, including Seth, he was not punished. Ra took him, made him a companion on the solar boat, gave him the job of creating thunder to frighten people into respecting the gods. The murderer of Osiris, the being who had spent 80 years trying to steal a throne through fraud and assault and boat races and lettuce, was given a job making scary noises. This was considered justice in ancient Egypt. Okay, stop. Because at this point, you are probably asking a very reasonable question. These gods forgot their own children minutes after creating them, lost their eyes constantly, spent 80 years failing to resolve something obvious, got defeated by a lettuce. The most powerful healer in existence could not diagnose a scorpion sting. And millions of people built them the greatest monuments in human history. Why? Seriously, why? Because here's the thing about Egyptian gods that makes them completely different from every other mythology. Greek gods were perfect, immortal, eternal, arbitrary. They did whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted, and you could not predict them, understand them, or reason with them. You could only hope they were not paying attention to you today. Egyptian gods were a mess, and that was exactly the point. Because a mess you can understand is less terrifying than perfection you cannot. Egyptian gods operated according to rules, cosmic rules that applied to everyone, including the gods themselves. Osiris was murdered. But the murder was eventually judged. Seth cheated for 80 years, but he eventually lost. The system was slow, embarrassingly slow, occasionally completely absurd, but it worked. And the Egyptians had a word for this, Ma'at. Not just a concept, an actual goddess, the fundamental force that held existence together, the idea that the universe had a correct state, and that everything from the movement of the sun to the flooding of the Nile to what you had for breakfast was either aligned with that state or working against it. The gods were not worshipped because they were impressive. They were worshipped because they kept Ma'at alive. Ra moved the sun across the sky every single day. Every morning the Egyptians woke up and the sun was there, which meant Ra had successfully fought off the chaos serpent Apophis, who tried to swallow it every night. That was worth a pyramid or two. And then there was death. The Egyptians thought about death more seriously than almost any civilization before or since. Not with panic, with genuine philosophical curiosity. What actually happens? Your heart gets weighed, literally, on a scale, against a feather. The feather of Ma'at, truth and cosmic order. If your heart was lighter than the feather, if you had lived honestly and treated people decently, you passed into the afterlife. If your heart was heavier, if you had been cruel and selfish and dishonest, a creature called the Devourer ate your heart, and you simply ceased to exist. Not hell, not punishment, just nothing. Gone. And the god sitting in judgment over all of this? Osiris. The same Osiris who had been tricked into a coffin at a dinner party, cut into 14 pieces, partially eaten by a fish, who had lost everything and descended into darkness. That Osiris. Not a perfect, distant being who had never suffered. Not a god who had always been powerful and just and untouchable. A god who had been completely destroyed and kept going anyway. When an Egyptian stood before that judgment, they were not facing someone who had never known failure. They were facing a god who had been cut into 14 pieces and still showed up for work. That is a very different kind of comfort, and honestly, not a bad god to be judged by. So, Egyptian gods. Let us be honest about what we just covered. The supreme creator of the universe lost his children in the dark minutes after making them. The goddess of healing could not diagnose a scorpion sting. The god of wisdom spent his time hustling the moon in board games. The most important legal case in divine history took 80 years and was resolved by a lettuce. These were the beings that ancient Egypt built its entire civilization around. And that civilization lasted 3,000 years. 3,000 years of pyramids and pharaohs and mummies and temples and one of the most sophisticated cultures in human history. While their gods were losing eyes and climbing into coffins at dinner parties. Something clearly worked, and here is what it was. The Egyptians never pretended their gods were perfect. They told the real stories, the embarrassing ones, the ones where Ra drooled and Isis got startled, and the entire Council of Gods spent 8 decades avoiding an obvious decision because their chairman found the plaintiff irritating. They told those stories and built pyramids anyway, because the gods were not the point. The ideas were. Order is worth fighting for, even when the fight is ridiculous. Justice is worth pursuing even when it takes 80 years and involves a lettuce. A god who has been broken and dismembered and partially eaten by a fish is more qualified to judge human failure than one who has never been tested. These are not bad ideas. These are actually pretty good ideas. Good enough to run a civilization on for 3,000 years. Good enough that echoes of them still show up in every major religion that came after Egypt. The God who suffers and descends and returns. The judgment after death. The cosmic scales. The idea that the universe bends, slowly, imperfectly, occasionally via boat race, toward something like justice. All of that started here. With gods who lost their eyes constantly and could not diagnose a scorpion sting, which is either deeply comforting or deeply alarming depending on your perspective. Probably both.